Hey, welcome back to The Balancing Act. Hey, Nick. How are you, mate?
Hey, Lars. Hey, man.
Doing all right?
Yeah, it's going good.
Good.
How you going?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, mate. I'm tired as we come towards the end of the year. I'm getting tired. But
Did you know,
tell me.
11 episodes this year?
Yeah.
How good is that?
Yeah, this is our 11th episode today.
Yeah.
So we actually only ever planned on making six podcasts in the first year, and we've done 11. And we've had some crazy guests on, which has been awesome. Right? It's been a lot of fun.
Look, to be fair, I'll be honest, I didn't know what to expect coming into this space.
Well, either did I. We were making it up as we were going, mate.
We were
That's
like,
the truth.
let's see what happens.
See what happens.
And it's actually, I mean, some of the crazy conversations with John Owen, some of the stuff that we've had with Patricia Wirikun, some of the stuff we've had with Mike Frost, like it's just been...
Yeah, John Anderson.
Crazy. It's been great. Hey?
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun.
I honestly thought, we'll probably just get some guys from our church to come and sit and talk nonsense with us because that's what
But even there, though, we had some really intriguing conversations with some people as we watched their journey of following Jesus and how they're navigating living in the world and not being of the world. Well, and even today, as we come into the last episode for 2025, mate, we have a cracking guest on this morning. We have Dave Deane with us. Dave, how are you, mate? You doing all right?
Doing well, boys. How you going?
Yeah, doing well. Yeah. Just by way of an introduction, so Dave is a member of Questioning Christianity. He's been working for Questioning Christianity for the last couple of years. And before that, Dave was involved for 14 odd years in defence and aeronautical space engineering type stuff. I probably got that wrong, but he's really smart. He's he's up there. Well, much more than a football player and some bloke from South Africa. It's true. Seriously, but and so Dave is also married. He's got a couple of kids and lives in Newcastle, which is a beautiful part of the world. It really is. Mm-hmm. So, Dave, mate, thanks so much for joining us on The Balancing Act. This is a conversation that we've been really wanting to have as we kind of discuss how we think about the nature of apologetics, what is apologetics, and how do we as Christians and the church as a whole engage in meaningful ways into the life of our communities around us and into the world around us. Yeah. But before we jump there, Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, mate? What's your story? How did you get involved? How did you go from defence, aeronautical engineering into the apologetic space?
Yeah. Well, let me just say as well, sorry for not being there in person. Crazy time of the year, as you can appreciate. Would love to come hang out sometime. I have a lot of love for Orange because I'm a country kid, although you guys are really posh country town out there. And
it is a little bit like that, I have to say. Yeah, it's true.
I'm a meat pie, chocolate oat kind of guy. But you guys, your degustation and your wine country, it's great. You can spend a lot of money out your way. I grew up in Gunnedah. Now in Newcastle. I came here in 2006, which is a while ago now, for university. So went from the small country town to boarding school for a couple of years in Sydney. Happy medium was Newcastle, so I settled here for engineering. It wasn't aeronautical engineering, it was structural civil work. I came out of that and did one engineering footing design for a particular structure out there at, I think it was Tamworth Airport, and that was the extent of my engineering work. I went straight into management after that, basically within the engineering environment, but I wasn't doing any design work. So I've really spent 14 years in the defence and aerospace contractor space. So I was never in uniform. I began with a consultancy firm, then moved to Lockheed Martin, where I spent a decade out there at RAF-based Williamtown working on ground-based telecommunication radar systems. Then we moved to the aeronautics division, and I was up there, so to speak, with the F-35 pilot training as the OEM of the F-35, which is on our shores, thanks to, I guess, all of our taxpayer money collectively. That was a big investment from our government, but we had to bring that in. We had to train up, stand up the infrastructure and the personnel, and I was involved in program managing that from the training aspect for several years there at the end. But after 10 years with Lockheed, 14 in engineering, defence contracting, I've now moved to do what I'm doing here, which is working with questioning Christianity for the last 2 years. And there's obviously a bit of a backstory there as well.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy. It's amazing just to hear your secular work kind of history. And then you just transition to, and then, just 2 years working for questioning Christianity, so nonchalant. It's fine. That's a big jump, mate. How did you get there? So did you grow up in a Christian home? Did you, faith was a big part of your life growing up? And then what led you to jumping out of that and going and engaging in theological education? I know you studied also at Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics and then moving into this space. I mean, there's something has taken hold of you in that space. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, it's funny because when I did leave engineering, people were like, so you're going to become a priest? What's happening here? It was pretty confusing for some people. So yeah, I was raised in a Christian home. There's some wonderful history there through my parents' generations as well, going back some generations in terms of mission work abroad. And in fact, I've got my 9th great-grandfather on my mother's side. He wrote a commentary on Ephesians that was endorsed by Spurgeon, of all people. I've actually got that off my bookshelf here, which is pretty neat.
That is pretty cool, man.
That's pretty cool.
But, as a kid, I was a Gunnedah Baptist boy, so I feel very much at home sitting here in this conversation with you both. And it was a small-town church, and I made a commitment when I was 6 years old, sitting with my mother, waiting for my sisters to come out of a local gymnasium there in Gunnedah. And I think that was meaningful in retrospect, but it was really growing up aware of God, involved in youth groups, involved in sorts of Christian camps for kids and all of the rest. Then I went off to boarding school, put up with a bit of bullying, came out from that and went to live on campus at college here in Newcastle and wanted to be the cool kid and basically live it up. Did that for a couple of years and realized, wow, whether you're bullied or whether you're cool, it's just kind of empty either way. Started taking my faith quite seriously then in my 3rd year of university, and irony of ironies, I was leading a Gunnedah youth group out at, I think it was a KYLC event at Katoomba convention there. And so it was the morning, 6 a.m., got up early from the boys' cabin and thought I had to go set a good example for all of those guys. So I set my alarm super early, went up to the Eagle Hawk lookout there, which you can go see today. It's just behind the convention centre. And I sat there, opened up my Bible with this beautiful view of classic Katoomba fog. And what I couldn't see in the view, I saw for the first time perhaps ever in Scripture as I was thumbing my way through the Bible. I thought, Ephesians is like the shortest book ever, right? So I thumbed my way through that. I was a little bit bored with the first couple of chapters, but then as it got to really those imperatives from 4 to 6 in the back end, I started coming alive. And it was in Ephesians chapter 5 that I read something about how, live as children in the light, don't walk as the Gentiles do in darkness. And then I thought, wow, I'm a Christian around my Christian friends and a non-Christian around my non-Christian friends, and that's not consistent. And so I prayed a prayer and I gave my life to the Lord again, and the sky didn't rip open. I didn't hear an audible voice, nothing like that. But what I did walk down that hill from that I didn't walk up with was a sensitivity to sin that I've never been able to lose. And basically that sensitivity has just grown and grown and grown. And over the years, I've really come to realize it's not just a sensitivity to sin, it's a sensitivity and awareness of the love of God and the covering of shame and the acceptance of who I am in him. So that was now in my 3rd year of university that all of that went down. And after that, I, having been the cool kid on campus, was really wanting to, I guess, challenge people and say, well, what have you got? Because they're thinking it was weird that now I'm starting to take my faith seriously. And so this I don't want to be told what to do or think mentality that came out of boarding school now got channeled in an immature way into my sharing of my faith on campus, which is a straight up evangelistic kind of mission field when you think about it. And so I'm just bombastically telling everyone what I believe and why I believe it. Obviously, questions are coming. I didn't even know the word apologetics and didn't know much about evangelism. I was just doing it by, I guess, osmosis. I was just in the environment. And then there was an opportunity to give a intercollegiate speech night, and I thought, here's my time. I'm going to stand up there and tell everyone why I believe the Bible. I was terrified. Like, I was shaking. I practiced in front of the mirror like 50 times to try and memorize this thing. Got up there and just was bullish, went for it. And again, we're talking before the show started here about the new atheism era. This was the height of all of that. So we're talking like 2008. And I went for it and sat down, and everyone was like quiet. And I think I gave a Spurgeon line, actually, I don't need to defend the Bible. It's like a lion. I'll just unlock the cage and it'll come out and tear you all up, kind of thing. It was pretty in their face. And then I sat down, and there was the judges adjudicated the 30 or whatever speeches, and then they ended up deciding we can't decide between the winners, so they tied me and another guy, and the other guy's speech was all something funny about how he got drunk and woke up in a room he didn't know, and then there's me, Mr. Christian boy, telling everyone to believe the Bible. And I thought, is that not just a snapshot of where people were at least then, and perhaps today too, in terms of the cognitive dissonance in people's minds of wanting truth and holding on to the lights and glitter of the world. So that was, me coming out, if you will, and starting to take my faith seriously. And from then, I really wanted to go straight into ministry. My parents gave me good advice and said,
don't do it.
David, we think it's you're 3/4 of the way through your engineering degree. How about you learn to live a bit more before you presume to get up there and start talking to everyone about life? And so, there are Timothys out there that need to go to college quick, so to speak. I was not one of them. I had some lessons to learn. I had some life experience to gain. And I went into engineering, and I never thought of myself as really pastoral ministry or anything like that. But after doing a number of Bible study leading, having the same questions asked over and over, I thought, this is really frustrating. There's got to be answers. So I started looking into where I could study, not for any academic reasons, just for personal kind of satisfaction reasons. And then I found a college, ended up Googling like best apologetics. By that stage, I knew what apologetics was. Best apologetics Bible colleges, found a couple of seminaries in the US, ended up enrolling. This was all pre-COVID, so like distance education was a bit scandalous back then. It's not so much anymore. And ended up enrolling, got to go over there and meet and greet a number of times. I got to study under Professor Norman Geisler, the late Norman Geisler. Wow. I'm not sure if you're aware of him, but he was my teacher and my professor. And wow, he didn't just tell me what to think, he taught me how to think. And I chose a philosophy of religion major, so I did a lot of the theology and a lot of the philosophy. It was a huge course, probably the equivalent of an MDiv plus a little bit more, and studied all of that. Got opportunities as I was going to publish with some of the professors in some apologetics books that they were writing. The Comprehensive Guide to Apologetics, got to write in that alongside some of my heroes. So here, I didn't know that I had an academic bone in my body until I found something that I was interested in. And so wrapped up that in 2019. So still working as an engineer. In the middle of that, I got married to my beautiful wife, Julie. She's
it's a big thing, mate. She'll probably be watching this. So you might want to make a bit more of that.
So she helped sharpen me, and absolutely gave me a real spark to pursue theology. Just the mind that she has, and all the way throughout my degree. Actually, she was the one that was reviewing and editing and giving me feedback on all of my papers and my 92,500 page master's thesis. She went through that twice. So thank you, Julie. And that was 2019. We wrapped that up. And so now we're still pre-COVID. I did not have any particular inkling again to do pastoral ministry. I was preaching in churches all over the place just as opportunities permitted. And I was being encouraged to pursue that. But I just didn't know what it was. Like, what do you want me to do with all this learning, Lord? And long story short, I'd made some contacts with some friends. You mentioned on the startup here, he very much mentored me from Gunnedah days and encouraged me to get involved with the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics over there in the UK. So I applied, and we packed up and moved over there, and that in itself was incredible. We moved over there with my wife pregnant with our first child after really struggling to try and fall pregnant.
Wow.
And so just the idea of having a child, the first child abroad, was obviously huge for Julie. But she felt the Lord was in this, and so we all went together. And yeah, we can slow down there if you'd like and double click on that if you want, because that was an incredible experience being there in the UK.
Yeah, that would have been amazing. Really would have been. Well, I want to explore that with you at a later point.
Like, I kind of resonate with that a little bit. We came 2 years ago, and it's just that moment of taking a step of faith and going, okay, Lord, in many ways, you're going with us here because we can't do this alone. And it's just it's so good, man.
Yeah, and I did that when I moved from Sydney to Orange.
It's a comfortable move. I mean, like I said, it's posh city out there, so I get why you didn't just do the whole hog and go to Gunnedah.
Right, please. You cut the umbilical cord from secular workspace and head full-time into what you're doing now, which is questioning Christianity. Talk to us about that.
Ravi Zacharias International Ministries was a huge backbone to Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics, and he died. I was with him 4 months before he died, but obviously he didn't know he had cancer at that stage. He dies. 12 months later, everything comes out about him. And I was back in engineering for 3 years after all of that. So I thought that was my big break. I was going to go off and do PhDs, got into a few, universities abroad, but settled back into engineering. Did not lose my heart, obviously, for the Lord, but there's a passage in Thessalonians that just live in a quiet life. And I thought, if that's what fame and fortune and lights and stages give you, I want none of that. Yeah. And so, retrospectively, this is the Lord cutting me down through other people's mistakes and forming a character that, I didn't have to learn on my own dime. And it was then, now that we've got kids, and then we had a second child in that 3-year space back. And this is now getting to your question. We bought a home, we start renovating it. Here I am doing the engineering thing, preaching whenever I get time. And then things at work were just getting tough. And I never loved it. I could do it, and I was doing well at it. And I'd learnt contentment the hard way, but I was really just like, oh, Lord, what are we doing here? And long story short, a friend of mine, Dan Patterson, who actually established Ravi Zacharias International Ministries in the Australasia, he was the first boots on the ground. He did the OCCA program a lot earlier than I. And he kicked off questioning Christianity. And after that was up for a couple of years, he and I were friends and chatting by the wayside. He extended a hand for me to come on board 1 day a week, and we tried that out. So I rejigged to a flexi work arrangement with Lockheed. And then after a while, talking to him about work and sharing kind of where my head and heart's at, and he said, why don't you come on board full-time with me? And I was totally taken aback by that. So, to be a 50% pay cut, but you don't do this for the money. And I remember chatting with Julie, and this young kid who was just like, go get him, let's get out there, let's go get into ministry in my 3rd year of uni, quit it all and jump in. Now I'm thinking, I think we can do this, Julie. We've got a mortgage, we've got house renovations, we've got kids, So the Lord brought me on a huge journey there, and she's like, David, you need to do this. Who else in this country is offering you a fixed salary to give you the freedom to go and do apologetics and evangelism in Australia? And that itself, we can double click on that because there's not many opportunities. And I was like, wow, you're right. So I felt like I was getting pushed out of Lockheed, and I felt like I was getting pulled into this. And I remember praying. I remember where I was on the road driving through the 100K zone between Newcastle and Ralph Williamstown, praying, Lord, you need to kick this door open because I'm going to try and pull it shut. You need to kick it open, make it obvious. And he did in various ways. And so I handed in my resignation on October the 16th, 2023. Took 5 weeks off and jumped on board with Dan, and I felt like I was drinking from a fire hose, trying to learn Christianity in the Aussie context because I'd preached in my own circles, but I'd studied all abroad. I'd never really studied here. I'd never networked. And so this was all drinking from the fire hose in that sense. But if this isn't the affirmation of a calling, I don't know what is. So 2 years later, I would not want to be anywhere else.
There's something to be said around the idea, and that's, I think, what the balancing act is, right? Is this idea that we thought through this and we were like, there's not much going for the context of Australia in the Christian circles, right?
Yeah.
Like, and talking to Australians, not American ideas, not South African ideas, Australian ideas, in this context, helping Australian people. And that's why we want to dive into this in a contextually sensitive way, going, man, what does apologetics mean for us here in Australia, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a really fundamental question. And there's a couple of times there you said that you were doing apologetics without even knowing what apologetics was and what it meant, and then you said then you discovered it or what apologetics is. Why don't you help us? Why don't you tell us what apologetics is and what it is not?
So apologetics, it's a word that's lifted straight out of ancient legal terminology. So it's a jurisprudence language. And in the first century there, if you were dragged before a magistrate or something like that, the formal accusation would come, it'd be read out, and then you would stand there and you'd have to give your apologia. That's the Greek word that we translate as apologetics, and it means defense. It's an unfortunate translation. It means nothing like apology or apologizing. It's too close for comfort, but it doesn't mean that at all. It means giving your defense, your explanation for why you were doing whatever it was that you were doing, why you believe it was true, why it was good. And we see this word apologia used all throughout the New Testament. We see it particularly, say, in the book of Acts, Peter before the Sanhedrin. You see it with Paul before Galileo and Agrippa. Those guys, they're not giving like cold philosophical monologues in there. They're giving like reasoned, embodied, hope-filled defenses and commendations of the gospel. So when I talk about apologetics, I simply mean the art of commending and defending the gospel like Jesus did. So commending on the front foot in the offering of positive, compelling reasons why the gospel is both true news and good news for humanity, but also on the back foot as well in terms of defending, answering questions and objections with gentleness and respect to show the beauty and credibility of Jesus, really. So that's probably the broader idea of apologetics. But if you were to zoom in on perhaps the central apologetics Bible verse in the New Testament, it's there in 1 Peter 3:15. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense, an apologia. And that never happens in a vacuum, right? I mean, Peter, for a start, he's writing there to people in the first century scattered across Imperial Rome. But for that instruction to even make sense, it assumes at least two things. First, that Christians are living questionable lives, the kind of steady, hopeful, humble lives that would elicit conversation and questions with people. And the second thing that it kind of assumes is that they're living lives embedded in culture, right? The balancing act, in the world, not of the world. They're not hiding from people. They're present, they're available, they're near enough to people, and people feel comfortable enough to come to them and ask them real questions. So there's a lot you could unpack there just in 1 Peter 3:15 in terms of what it signals about apologetics in terms of Christians. For a start, it's given to all believers, right? So there is no specialist here. Yeah. But it's all about living a questionable life in a questioning culture. And the questions of our culture change, which means our apologetic approach, I think, should really learn to be agile and adapt as well.
No, that is a cracking answer. I really like that. I think it is living questionable lives in close proximity. I think that's... It's a great kind of picture of how we are to live as disciples in this world around us and how that operates. I think it is great for us to be really clear for people who are listening to us to realise that apologetics isn't apologising for our faith, but it is giving a defence, a gentle and respectful and gracious defence of why we believe what we believe and what that looks like in terms of evidence and the likes that are around us. Dave, you made a point to say that that needs to be some agility in the way that we operate. So as culture shifts and changes, obviously the message of the gospel never changes. That doesn't need to be kind of fluid in any kind of way, but the way in which we engage in culture around us does, particularly in an apologetic space. I'm interested to see your perspectives or to hear your perspectives in the way we need to do that now and how that shifted over the last little while. I was saying before that when I was going through college back in that 2008 kind of era as well, that at the height of what we call the new atheist movement, which I want to get you to explain to our listeners on what that actually is, because you're far more qualified in that space than what we are. But there was this new atheist movement. Oh, mate, please! I've heard your summations. We really need to listen to Dave. That's why we got him on to the podcast. When I was doing an apologetic subject at that point, it was around this. We need to fight fire with fire. That was kind of the kind of perspective of the lecturer at the time. Can you take us through what's the shifting dynamic of cultural engagement? How do we need to do this? And what does that look like now?
I think to proof text what you're saying, because I want to amen straight up the agility there of the gospel, but you made a really important point. You said the gospel itself doesn't change. And let's just proof text that for you. Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, he says, 1 Corinthians 2, I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. There you go.
Yeah.
There's a priority there. And then a couple of chapters later, and I think it's 1 Corinthians 8 or 9, I think it's 9, to the Jews, I became a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became as one under the law in order to win them. And then to those who were weak, I became weak. I've become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. So his goal is always the same, to win them. And how does he win them? Through that gospel that doesn't change of Christ crucified. And yet he does it in different ways. He tailors the delivery there. So the unchanging gospel is always the goal. Seeing people saved is always a goal, but the strategy for how we get there changes season to season, culture to culture, people to people, meaning that there has to be a flexibility built into faithful gospel communication.
Yeah.
Which begs the question, where are we? Is it the same place? Would it be appropriate for me to go if I was on campus to stand up and bash everyone with my fire kind of, intercollegiate speech night? Why you should believe the Bible. I'll give you the short answer, but there needs to be a longer unpacking. The short answer is new atheism is dead and gone.
Yep.
And may it die the death of irrelevance it deserves.
Amen.
Did we learn our lessons? Should we fight fire with fire? What's going on there? I think no, in our cultural moment. I don't think that fighting fire with fire is the most helpful way right now. But honestly, it really depends on what culture we're in. Yep. Because there are some cultures within our culture, say from the East or Islam, where that's what meaningful communication looks like, fighting fire with fire. So it's not a simple yes or no. There are some cultures where meaningful discourse requires us to raise the temperature a bit. And yet at the same time, I think generally our culture here in Australia right now is such that it's not going to be the most effective way. Let me break it down this way. History, it tends to swing back and forth like a pendulum, from reaction to overcorrection to compensating to reacting, and on it goes. So new atheism kicks off there in the early 2000s. And it kicked off there because of this thing called 9/11. And extremist terrorism. And it really did come, the first envoys or whatever came from Richard Dawkins not long after that, months after that. He was writing papers, and then obviously you had the very famous line from Victor Stinger, science flies you to the moon, religion flies you into buildings. And then you had Sam Harris, Letter to a Christian Nation, come out. Then you had Richard Dawkins, God Delusion 2006 was published. So they were just coming out hard. What was new about atheism was not the theism, the negation of belief in God. That's not what was new. That's been around for a very long time. What was new was the shrill, mocking condescension and aggression that came in their tone. And so all of that's kicking off now in the early 2000s. And what it did was really marshal and leverage a high modern way of thinking, a very hard-edged science-only view of rationalism. That really fueled so much of the new atheist agenda. And what we've seen from a high level from that is, as new atheism was backing down, we've now swung the pendulum in culture to a more therapeutic, what you might call postmodern extreme of expressive individualism and all the legal and institutional and political entanglements that have come with that. So that was a huge cultural swing from this is the objective reality you must accept to this is my subjective reality that you now must affirm. And of course, between all of that or coming out of that, we've also had the global pandemic, COVID lockdowns, then we've had open war and tanks rolling across continental Europe, the likes of which we haven't seen since the middle of last century. Then, of course, we've had the Middle East popping off, and then we've had the whole AI revolution. And ducking and weaving through all of these swings of culture and chaos, we've now had Peter's ancient instruction for Christians to always be ready to give an answer. The answer isn't going to change, but it absolutely has to learn to duck and weave with the kinds of cultural issues that have been swung our way. And truth be told, when New Atheism first landed in the early 2000s, I don't think the church, broadly speaking, was prepared for it.
No, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. I think it's been a really interesting thing in that space that I think the church was on the back foot instantaneously. I don't think it knew how to give an account for the hope that we have, actually, by and large.
Totally.
I think it panicked. And it tried doubling down in lots of ways, and I think it remained silent in unhelpful ways. So I think we had both ends. We had an aggressive nature that wasn't necessarily helpful, and then we were silent in other quarters. I couldn't agree with you more on that front.
But here's the cool thing about Christianity. Just one of the, take your pick of how many reasons why I'm a Christian. It's that Christianity has built into it this ability to reform and self-critique. It's like structurally built into our faith. The Bible is astonishingly honest about its own heroes. We've got Abraham's cowardice, you've got Moses' temper, you've got David's moral collapse, you've got Peter's impulsiveness. The prophets are like always aiming their harshest words at the pagan nations, but not just at the pagan nations, but also at Israel's priests and kings. And then Jesus obviously comes on board, and who's he aiming at all the time? It's the Pharisees, it's his people, it's the leaders of Israel. But built into Christianity then is this structure to reform that I think the Reformation posture of Semper Reformanda, always reforming, just captures so well. And in hindsight, as I look back on this, we weren't ready. It's not hard to see why, given the amount of ground that the new atheists gained. And yet, after some time, Christianity's self-correcting instincts absolutely did kick in, because then we saw a renaissance of thought. Public apologetics coming out, the likes of Alistair McGrath, John Lennox, William Lane Craig. And with COVID lockdowns, again, coming in at the tail end of that, putting everyone at home in front of a computer, we've seen a whole generation now of young thinkers and pastors and academics engaging with these big apologetics questions. You had the likes of Justin Briley there in the UK with his unbelievable podcast, and he'd been doing that for a while. He was cool before it was cool.
Yeah, but it exploded,
really
right?
It exploded, and now you got everyone with a mic, trying to, which brings its own set of challenges for sure. But as a result of all of this, Christian apologetics, I'm happy to say, has gotten a lot better. It's got a lot more careful to the evidence. It's got a lot more nuanced with philosophy, a lot more honest about complexity, not overstating things, and people are just more comfortable saying what they should have always been comfortable saying: we don't know. Yeah. So the thin arguments of new atheism, and I can talk to you about how empty they were, so much of them, but they pushed the church to develop thicker, more robust responses. And in that sense, I think we truly, over the last decade and a half or two, have seen biblical reform in a really healthy way in the space of apologetics worldwide.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that one as well.
It's quite interesting though, right? Like you got someone like Richard Dawkins turning around and going, there's almost an internal arrogance that they carry that bothers me deeply. But there is this, they're sitting now going, no, I'm in some sense, I'm a cultural Christian, in some sense, and we want to see Christianity brought back, because it's almost as if they killed Christianity. And I'm like, there's such a weird thing that you're thinking here. It's a veiled sense of, my intellectual ability was such that Christianity sort of took a massive step back. And it was like, well, I'm not sure that's the case. I think what you're saying about this autocorrection, the minute Christianity stepped back onto the stage, it poked holes in the new atheism, where you had then all of them sort of disappear into obscurity and not really take on much more of this abrasive kind of critique of Christianity. Rather, their ideas and their thoughts were found very lack and wanting in so many different areas. That, I think now they're going, we want Christianity back. And I'm just wondering, like, you didn't do anything to Christianity that was particularly harsh or sets us back in any real way. Like,
Yeah, I mean, they, as people like Lennox and others showed, you had a shrill tone will only get you so far. People get bored of that after a while. But the substance, it wasn't just the tone, it was the substance of what they had to offer. And it was a nearly 100-year-old institutionally bunk view of science, namely logical positivism. That was the theory. It's because what they were pushing, their science-only agenda was not a theory of science. It was a philosophy about science, put forward by A.J. Ayer, and that's been pushed out of the academy as a philosophy of science for some time, 50 to 100 years, and they were just kind of getting some street cred on it for a while. But it's not hard to show the intellectual hollowness of so much of their arguments built upon that self-defeating theory or view of science that everything must be empirically verified, except obviously for the very claim that everything must be empirically verified. So it's cutting off the branch that it sits on. So yeah, it fell down because of its tone and its lack of substance. But it wasn't, and the Christian voices helped for sure. But I think it was, in terms of their acceptability in culture, that was probably systemic as well, in part because of the pendulum swing that had gone from that hard objectivism kind of science-only vision of life to the extreme of individualism and expressivism and don't you tell me what to do. And then you had this weird kind of alliance. Alliance is too strong, but where at least the Richard Dawkins of this world was getting cancelled because of his views of transgenderism, along with various Christians. And so it was actually, it's probably worth pointing out, it was actually through all of this that the real heroes, cultural heroes, started to come through, and it wasn't obviously Dawkins, but it wasn't necessarily anyone in the church either. It took the likes of the Jordan Petersons of this world, who don't explicitly confess or profess Christianity, but nevertheless sympathize with it. And they came out standing in the public, pushing back against this kind of pronoun usage there in Canada at his university where he was, and gender identity and inclusivism and the reforms that were being pushed through from a political legislative level. And he basically single-handedly, but obviously with a bunch of others as well around him, Dave Rubin and others, they allowed space for the meaning and coherence and beauty specifically of the Judeo-Christian vision to breathe once again. And I think that's led significantly in part to what some people are calling, at least in my local circles, a vibe shift that's seen Christianity having cultural currency today, unlike what it's had for a long, long time. People are no longer arguing against religion, but they're quietly wondering whether there is something more to life than science and politics. And that is supported by some of the many public people that we see today becoming Christians. You have the outspoken atheist, perhaps the most prominent female voice of new atheism herself, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She's become a committed Christian in recent years.
Yeah.
Her husband, Niall Ferguson, historian, public intellectual. And then obviously you have the big platforms like Lex Friedman, Piers Morgan, and of course Joe Rogan, who's doing excellent work in having apologists on like Steve Meyer, friend of our ministry, Wes Huff. In fact, Joe Rogan himself is an embodiment of the vibe shift, because in times past he was like fodder for apologists to grab sound bites of his nasty rants about Christianity. But now, by many accounts, he's attending a local evangelical church right there in Austin, Texas, which is pretty cool to see. And I think all of that, back to your question, starts to shape up how we, quote unquote, engage or fight fire with fire in this cultural moment. I just don't think it's necessary right now in that broad cultural sense of what we're talking about.
So we recognise that there's a shift inside of our culture, and that shift is happening predominantly in the Western culture right across the board. But let's look specifically in Australia. We're starting to see a softening or an inquisitiveness that is starting to rise. How do we as the church, and by which I mean like the collective individual disciples engaging in their own workplaces, engaging in the likes, how do we help people to think in being able to give in a defense of the gospel without being defensive?
How do we give a defense without being defensive? There are many people who are saying, I want to get to that question, but I want to preface it with this. There are many people who are saying we need to be defensive. I shouldn't say many. There is a movement within Christianity that are saying now is the time, particularly in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, now is the time to kind of come out triumphalist. It's kind of pejoratively smeared as the alt-right energy, some people are calling it Christian nationalism. The problem is, what does that phrase mean? I don't pretend to be a political analyst or anything, but here's what I see when I look at this cultural mood, because, again, these extremes didn't come out of nowhere. They came, in one sense, from unaddressed grievances. And as I said before with these pendulum swings, they tend to come because of a push. And if the hard left sometimes functioned with this posture of shut up and agree, and that really frustrated perhaps more conservatives in culture, then the hard right often tends to respond, and some are now wanting to respond with shut up and fight. So one is silencing and the other is shouting, but both come from places where people just don't feel heard. And so I think, maybe just to preface an answer to your question, I think sometimes our society just needs a good healthy dose of marriage counselling, because what happens in a marriage is, when grievances are ignored, the quiet partner eventually becomes louder and louder, and the margins get louder and the hurt becomes louder and the unhealthy voices rush in to fill the gap. And we're seeing that culturally. And it's into that climate that things like Christian nationalism are now rising up. And again, depends on what we mean by that. That could be something like just having recognition of Jesus as Lord from a national kind of level, right through to blood and soil, ethnocentric, Nick Fuentes style anti-Semitism, which is completely reprehensible. But I suppose what I want to caution is that Christianity is not just another tribe in the cultural war, right? And the moment the church simply chooses sides, we stop being a witness and start being just another faction. And that's not to say that we shouldn't have political views. Of course we should, but we are citizens. We're citizens in Australia, but we're also citizens of heaven, the kingdom of God. And the church doesn't neatly fit into any party or ideology. That's partly why it's true. It's not a product of humanity. And the gospel is not fundamentally a platform. It's a person. And the church is not it's not a voting block. It's a people that are shaped by a crucified king. So, the moment that, and I'll stop my rant now, but I'm trying to be a little bit restrained. But the moment that the church reaches for the world's weapons, I think the church starts losing, even if it thinks it's winning. The tone of the message must match the tone of the tone of the messenger must match the tone of the message. Yeah, and you cannot you can't preach a crucified king with a clenched fist. You can't announce a kingdom of grace with the posture of domination, right? And if the fruit of that fire doesn't look like the fruit of the Spirit, it's not the fire of God.
Yeah, how do you do that if we're called to be ambassadors of Christ? If we're representatives of the King and this kingdom, then you can't be a representative when you're running at odds to the King and the kingdom in which you're purporting to represent. It is a strange thing to me.
I do want to ask though, and it's more like, in part, it's more just a little bit of a pushback, because there is this American ideology and society that's playing these games pretty openly, and I fully agree with everything you're saying. How does that translate into an Australian context though? And I know, because in part we consume a lot of American content, but in reality, Australians are just different to the American populace. Or do you disagree with that?
I completely agree. I happen to be a dual citizen with the US, so I can speak perhaps into both of these a little bit. But yeah, I do want to come back and make sure we address that.
Yeah, I want to address the question. Thanks for derailing it, Nick.
No, but I just think it's important, because I think, again, we're driving to an Australian context, right? And
I agree.
Again, you're
and
right.
I think we need. That's part of the problem with what do we mean by Christian nationalism, and I don't necessarily want to get into the theological, political debate of that. But great point here about the Aussie and US culture and more abroad. Again, I'm still figuring out so much of the Aussie Christian culture because I've been educated abroad, but there is politics here as well. But I think what are some of the hallmark differences between Australia and, say, the US? Well, coming from the UK, we've got this tall poppy syndrome inherited, and that's a massive difference, generally speaking, with the US, because we're much more comfortable with cutting people down to size, and the US are much more comfortable with the charisma and the confidence that comes along with that might allow certain people and platforms to grow, whereas we just wouldn't necessarily have that here, because we almost see charisma as a bit of a liability. And so I think perhaps, how does that then affect our apologetics? I think when our apologetics, it needs to be more human. in a sense. It needs to be more normal, more grounded. Aussies don't want know-it-alls. We don't want stage strutting heroes and great big tent revivals, at least not now. Perhaps back in the 60s with Billy Graham when there was some Christian ethos around the culture, but not now. Aussies tend to want somebody with blisters on their hands, right? Somebody who knows what it is to listen and not be shocked, who doesn't pretend that they're somebody that they're not. So just a hot tip, if your apologetics or evangelism sounds more like a TED talk than mixed up with some sort of victory speech or something like that, you're probably going to lose the Australian room. But if it sounds like a friend pulling up a chair for a coffee at a cafe, you're probably going to get people to lean in. But another big thing that it is certainly present in the States, but it's just huge here in Australia, is apathy. I think our biggest issue here is not open hostility. It's not angry atheists or megaphone activists. It's by far the biggest issue is apatheism, not agnosticism, atheism, apatheism. It's like we've taken that she'll be right mentality of Aussie culture that's great in some senses, but we projected it into eternity. Why bother with God? Why disrupt a comfortable life? We think, why think about death? Like when the surf's good and the beer's cold, why would you go there, Dave? Like, it's just, dude, like, lighten up. In fact, I was reading earlier, we rank number 11. We've backed off one space in the World Happiness Report for 2025. So 11 in the world. It's not bad. Life's pretty good. Sunburnt country, land of sweeping plains, no tanks of war, no immediate existential threat. And when life works and consumerism brings comfort, God is now an option on the shelf, just like anything else in your aisle at your local Big W or whatever. And that's a huge contrast, not so much with the States, but certainly with our brothers and sisters, say, in Africa. We just had friends from our local church who came back and the stories about what's going on that our media aren't reporting, they're not appropriate to share here. But radical Islam, religious extremism, it's devastating those people. And we don't know anything like that kind of cost of discipleship here. Yeah. We still ache, but usually that ache is beneath the surface in different ways. But in that sense, and I think like evangelism and apologetics in Australia, it really is perhaps a long game reality. I think it requires patience and presence and relationship and consistency, because very few Aussies tend to come to Jesus when they lost an argument. Most come because life shook them awake somehow, and it was the Christian friend who they knew was always there, was there at that time to catch them as well. Sure. So yeah, I mean, there are a couple of thoughts.
No, well, I think it's beautiful. For us, like this is you just encapsulated everything that we talk about. I mean, you're clearly way more intelligent than us, and certainly far more articulate because we spend hours and hours and hours having these conversations, and Dave comes on and in 10 minutes has just succinctly put what we've been kind of thinking. But one of the things that I think you hit out of, and this is what's really important for us as church leaders, for us as Christians, for you in Questioning Christianity, is if it is the faithful follower of Jesus who is living these beautifully questionable lives in proximity, that it is the long game, that they are looking for opportunities to present themselves, to pull up a chair when our friends and our family are at crisis points or at questioning points or at struggle points or even at the joyful times, and good questions come up. How do we equip people with good apologetics? How do we equip them with good defenses of the gospel? And how do they take hold of these in such a way that they naturally come up in these kind of conversations, as we grab our chair and sit around and have a coffee or a beer?
How do we help our people, particularly if they feel like unqualified? And just please remember the complete inadequacy and awkwardness and cringiness of that intercollegiate speech night when I got up. and the journeys that the Lord has... I mean, I did my first Q&A not long after that, and oh my word, I literally stood there silent because I didn't know how to answer some of the questions. I bombed. These things take time, and they take practice, and they take experience. And I have space now to do that in this capacity, which is something that's probably worth coming back to later as well in terms of just helping pastors think through this, because not everyone has the time to do what Dan and I do with Questioning Christianity. It's an enormous privilege and responsibility. But how do we help people And what is the church's responsibility in that? Maybe if we just think about the church's responsibility first. I sat in a class with French evangelist and missiologist. His name is Raphael Anzenberger, I think, Anzenberger. And he was the one that first helped me to see that the New Testament vision of evangelism and apologetics, it's not something that should just be outsourced to Questioning Christianity or some parachurch organization or something like that, but it's something that's primarily driven through that local church. To clarify, there is a place for itinerant ministry. Clearly, I'm in it. And when I read the New Testament, this seems to be the pattern of the Apostle John and the Apostle Paul. But, you have the Apostle Paul there saying in Romans chapter 1 that he longs to come to impart a spiritual gift to them. And I think there is this desperate need in our time for specialists and evangelists to come alongside and help pastors in local churches, simply because they don't have the bandwidth to be able to mine the latest apologetic argument on YouTube or anything. I mean, let me give you an analogy to try and make this land. My dad's a medical doctor and my wife's a medical doctor, both general practitioners, and they've trained in obviously very different generations of medicine, but both here in Australia. And I've heard my dad reflect on how, given the nature of primary healthcare in Australia today, with the explosion, obviously, of medical knowledge, but also the complexities of things around mental health and social needs and litigation, there's just no feasible way that GPs today could do the kind of work that he was doing at that intensity and with that kind of autonomy that he was decades ago. It's hard enough for him. It was hard enough for him back then as a GP, but if the medicine was like it is now back then, there's just no way he could have done it. And I think by way of analogy, it's a bit like that when it comes to local churches and pastors and this pressure that they perhaps might feel to equip their people. Because here at Questioning Christianity, we have time and space and research to read and write and field Q&A and practice our skills and have podcast chats like this. This is what I do. All of which local pastors, given all of their responsibilities, just don't have the headspace for. And I think we can't expect them to be on the leading edge, therefore, of the latest online questions and conversations. That's not to say they shouldn't be aware of what's going on, but to be on the leading edge of it. And so there is, all of that to say, there is a place for itinerants and apologetic specialists. But how do we equip? I think local church is primary. And when I read the New Testament, we see there that many of the instructions come about evangelism and apologetics. They're given first and foremost to the church. Ephesians 4:11 talks about he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, or pastors and teachers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for the purpose of building up the body of Christ to the full measure and stature and unity of the Son of God. So there is a primacy in the church there, but I think the equipping it comes by osmosis in that you can't really equip people to do something that you're not doing yourself as a local church pastor or church community. I mean, I think you have to be out there on the front line, having real gospel conversations, fielding objections in our moment, making effort and energy to do that as a community. Because I think the best training, the best equipping isn't necessarily just taught. I think it's caught. And really, apologetics is more like an apprenticeship than a lecture. Like, hey, if you want to grow in evangelism, if you want to understand some more apologetics, great. Come with me. Watch, walk, ask questions, then go and have a go. And, we're going to be here beside you to help. There's a kind of spiritual DNA that passes by, osmosis as we walk side by side. And that's very much our ethos here at Questioning Christianity. And we've learnt that the hard way because there are a lot of people who fly the apologetics or apologist banner, and I wouldn't want them to speak at my church. So I think there's a huge responsibility for the church to prioritize this, as the New Testament calls us to. But maybe the simplest way to put it then is the local church is basically God's classroom for equipping Christians to learn how to love Jesus with their whole head and whole heart and to speak about him with courage and kindness. I mean, the Bible itself, it's not a speed course. It's more like a lifelong spiritual curriculum for people to wrestle with and trudge with. And it's in that trudge that I think God forms Christ-like character, the kind of faith that perseveres, the kind of faith that steadies itself, as 1 Peter 3:15, the great locus classicus of apologetics in the New Testament. That's all about poise. And we as the people of God are those who wrestle with God. That's literally what Israel means in the Old Testament. It was about the trudge, it was about the wilderness and the formation that came through that wandering. So I think it has to start there at the local church level. And if you're feeling underqualified, I get it. Most of us can carry this kind of quiet, low-level anxiety, and yet I think that's exactly where God is ready to use people.
Yeah. So can we just go back then? Can we go back to have you finish off that question around the difference between kind of defensiveness and defense?
So there's obviously a huge difference there. Think of it this way. Like, I'm just going to go back to my program management land. I would often have to ask people for like a report or something like that by 5 p.m. And let's just say that a report, by way of analogy, the report doesn't arrive in my inbox or something like that. So imagine then I walk over and I ask this person, hey, I noticed the report didn't come. Is everything all right? A defense would look like, yep, I sent it at 5 p.m. Here's a timestamp. Sorry about that. Looks like it got stuck in the firewall or something like that. That would be a defense. It's calm. It's poised. It's helpful. It actually addresses the question that's asked. Now, imagine another scenario, and I've had both of these in my life, right, where you come to the same situation, you go and ask the employee about the report, and immediately they snap back, like, why are you always on my case? You know, you never notice the things I get right, and sure enough, first thing in the morning, here, I haven't even had my coffee, and all you're just on my back, like, give me a rest. That would be defensiveness. And you feel that almost instantly before you can even begin to reflect on it and know what's going on, right? And when you do start to think about it, you're like, well, damage control. You're not even thinking about the report. This is all about the employee's felt need to protect themselves, to cover up and avoid feeling and exposure and whatever. So defensiveness derails, I think, the whole conversation. And when you bring that in now to that 1 Peter 3:15 passage, in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense for anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that you have within you. Peter's clear that the reason for the hope that you have within you is Jesus, who he is, what he's done, why he's worth trusting. So a Christian then who's making a defense, given an apologia, they're like the first employee. They're calm, they're clear, they're focused on reality and the reasons for why Jesus is their hope. You know, here's Jesus, here's why I trust him, here's what he's done in history, here's what he's done in my life. That's given an apologia. It's making a defense, and it's keeping the spotlight on Jesus with gentleness and respect, as Peter says. But imagine now a Christian who's like that other employee and is defensive. They're not doing apologetics. That's not what the word means. And what they're doing, though, is getting all hot under the collar. And again, we see poor examples of this online under the name apologetics. Even if they're rude or insulting, you know, if you're the question that comes to you, even if it's rude and insulting, if you're getting like that second employee, you're shifting the reason for the hope that you have, who is Jesus. You're shifting from that, and you're making it all about yourself, your fear and your pride, your insecurity, your vulnerability, which are not any particular reasons for any particular hopes. In fact, that's the kind of junk that Jesus comes to clean up in our lives. And yet you're putting a spotlight on it with defensiveness. So being defensive is all about being threatened, which communicates, I think, insecurity to the other person. Like, you see this. But making a defense is all about being thankful, which communicates confidence. And that comes from learning, that comes from leaning into our own relationship with the Lord there, honoring Christ the Lord as holy, which, by the way, is a cross-reference from Isaiah 8, which is so beautiful because it's all about Israel, don't fear, or Judah, don't fear the nations around you. Don't get caught up in all of the controversies and conspiracies and scandals. Fear God and make him your sanctuary. In other words, fear God and you won't need to fear anything else. It's like a simplicity to life. And, then you have like Hebrews 4:16, draw near in confidence. We need to lean into the reality of the sanctuary that is our hope, namely Jesus, that we are perfectly loved, perfectly embraced. He knows everything about us. We don't need to worry about the watching eyes of other people who might have a glimpse of one or two shameful things we've done. He sees it all. He loves us. He accepts us. He calls us child of God. And we need to communicate to people that is really who we are. And when we do that, our defense won't be defensive. It will be invitational. And it moves me to tears when I think about the woman at the well, whose story of shame is now an invitation of hope for others to come and see who this man is, who told me everything about me. The reason why she was out in the midday sun was because she wanted to get away from those watching eyes. And one conversation with Jesus, and she goes running in, telling everyone proudly, because her shame has now become a testimony of the transforming grace of God in her life. And that's the kind of stability that I think we need to have. And it comes from being grounded first and foremost in our relationship with God.
Yeah, I think it's so important, right? That when we're grounded in our relationship with Jesus, when we know him and we are diving into him, we are grounded, and it enables us to give a defense. I think for a lot of people, our defensiveness may come from an anxiety that on two fronts, an anxiety that somehow that if we get it wrong, that that we become a stumbling block to that person from getting to know Jesus. So I think there's an anxiety there. But I often wonder if part of that anxiety is also because there is maybe not a solidification, a real grounding in their own relationship with Jesus and being comfortable with him. And I can appreciate both of those anxieties at various times. But I think you hit out of something really beautiful there, that defense comes from being grounded in Christ, and we don't need to be defensive in that same way.
But there is this element, right, that says someone will turn around and say, I am grounded in Christ. I have a defense. I may be somewhat underqualified, and so there is an anxiety in that space that I carry.
Sure.
But also there is this, but some of the stuff that people bring to the table is quite antagonistic, right? Oh, why are Christians so bigoted? Whoa, how did we get there? And just being sort of prepared in some of these things, and I agree, Dave, there is this osmosis that takes place, but there's also maybe just a training space that we could provide and that we could talk through, because when we think about it, what are some of the common objections that are given to the Christian faith for the everyday man, right? Like, we're not talking high-level academic objections. We're just talking about someone sitting there that watches YouTube, that watches the news, that watches how Christians have interacted, and they're going, this is an objection. They throw that out there, and then we need to go, and this is a possible response. It's almost allowing our people to have a couple of rounds in the chamber to sort of fire them off when they need to, and not sort of feeling taken aback by that. What
are some of those common questions, do you think, that we need some level of equipping on?
Just on this point of questions, and we'll answer that too. But do you, as a point of trivia, do you guys have any idea how many questions Jesus asked across the four Gospels?
Lots. Is that that's a technical answer there, though, Dave?
Well, I guess it depends on how you count them. Depends on how you count them.
Oh, so you set me up with the question then. Oh, right.
There's a book by Martin Copenhagen. Sorry, I can't remember. 2014, he published it. And he documents 307 questions that Jesus asked across the Gospels. But any idea how many questions Jesus directly answered?
Tell me.
He was very good at being cryptic.
Yeah. Is that also one of those questions of, well, how did he go about answering that? Yeah, that's... Give it to us, Dave.
So less than 10. 3 to 8 is the two different counts I've seen. And why? Well, I don't think it's because Jesus was evasive or being uninformed. He was interested in questions and asking questions, not to avoid people, but to connect with the questioner, because questions don't ask questions. Questioners ask questions. People do. And I think the goal of apologetics and evangelism is not so much just information, but transformation, right? And so asking good questions is part of how we draw people into that formative process to give them space to think. So asking questions, when people come at you with questions, this is why I'm saying this. Jesus had people come at him all the time, sometimes with sincere and sometimes with bombastic, provocative, horns of dilemma, whichever way you go, you're stuffed kind of questions. Like that's what the Pharisees are doing to him all the time. And how did he respond? What do we do? What are the rounds in the chamber that we should have? I think asking a question back. is a simple thing all of us can do, just to defuse, to give space, and to bring clarity. And that's, again, not to dodge and hedge. We don't only want to do that. There's more we need to do. But it just as at least a beginning, it's like, oh, why do you say that? Oh, your God sends gay people to hell. I've had that happen before to me, from a really good mate of mine who's gay. And I was like, oh, why do you say that? And then it just opens up. And before I knew it, he was talking to me about his Catholic upbringing. And I'm like, okay, so let's talk about it. We're way away from the cultural heat of that comment that he made. You could have, if you do that enough, and you might have a few things you could say off the cuff. I think I said to him, oh, mate, come on. Gay people don't go to hell. I know why, because heterosexual people don't go to heaven. That's not what this is about. But anyway, what's going on there, and you can break it down. But I think just being able to create space by asking questions, diffusing, you're connecting with them. So no matter what, there is no cookie cutter way to answering questions, but there is kind of helpful philosophies or approaches. And I tend to try and follow a 3-step way, and any of my YouTube videos, and to some degree my sermons might have this flow. I try to connect, and then I try to reframe, and then I want to invite. So connect, reframe, invite. Connection is that back and forth question that I was talking about. It might be some sort of, tell me more, like empathy, and trying to work with them depending on what the question is. The reframe is trying to gently kind of turn that around somehow and give it a gospel refraction. And then the invitation might be to explore more with them, or to invite them to check out such and such online, or come to church or whatever, just to leave the door open there. That's what the invite is all about. So that's more of a way to go about it. But in terms of the actual questions themselves, it depends on the cultural milieu. And right now we're certainly not in the angry atheist new atheist era or anything like that. And I think a lot of the questions are more around like meaning and purpose, and questions of interestingly, heaven and hell have come up a lot for me lately. But I do want to say as well that questions of sexuality and science, those two typical apologetics questions that exemplify those pendulum swings, they're still around, and they're still up the top there, because even though we might say new atheism's dead and gone, and to some degree the political heat around these various identity and gender conversations in culture might be receding, the ground doesn't go with them. So if, I don't know, new atheist kind of science only views of life took 10 steps forward, now that it's backed off, it hasn't backed off 10 steps, it's backed off maybe 6 or 7, 3 or 4. And so there's still a lot of assumptions about there, particularly with young people, that, science explains away God. So that's always up there. Why does God care who I sleep with? That's always up there. And yet the kind of pointed end of a lot of the conversations I'm seeing are really around meaning and purpose today. I mean, just the other month I was talking to some year 12s about to leave school, and one of the questions, it was so moving. It was, how do I know that I'm not wasting my life after school? What's the meaning of life, and how do I know that I'm not wasting mine after school? It's like, wow, that's so cool. And so these are the kinds of questions that I think we need to be aware of today. They're the ones that have been asked more than ever. But the other ones are always there as well. But, something that we do at Questioning Christianity that might be helpful for the listeners is there's really two kinds of questions that all questions can be kind of summarized down to two kinds of questions. And those two kinds of questions are, is Christianity true, and is God good? So if you could think of a question that doesn't fit into one of those categories, I'd be all ears. I'd like to learn. So is God good? Is Christianity true? This is like all of the kind of factoid kind of science questions. Is it rationally coherent? It's Thomas asking, I can't believe unless I see with my own eyes and put my hands in his side. This is the evidence and the facts and all of that. The is God good question, these are the more personal questions. They have that moral dimension to them. And if you try to answer somebody's is it true question with a is God good answer, they're going to get frustrated because they're after facts and evidence. But if you try and answer somebody's is God good question with is God true answer, or is Christianity true answer with facts and evidence, man, you're going to really hurt people because they're going to feel unheard. There is a deep, visceral difference between a question of evidence and a question of why. And so I think we need to really be careful as Christians getting that dynamic right. And if some of our listeners can think through that dynamic, where is this question coming from? Is it a question of morality? Like, how could your God send people to hell? Okay, that's a is God good question. Or your Bibles contradict. I mean, here we are at Christmas time, and it's like all of these women at the empty tomb, they don't even get it right. Okay, that's a is Christianity true question. And I think if we can get that dynamic right, and even if you don't have a specific answer for all of those questions, just at least be aware of that dynamic and how to speak generically into them would take you a long, long way.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful, really, from a practical component. And I do think you're right. I do think that every objection really does fit into those two categories. I do think, and for the average person on the street, they're the two fundamental questions that keep coming up. I mean, in all of my years of ministry, in all of the opportunities that I've had to have conversations and proclaim Jesus, and all of the challenging questions come back, they always come back to one of those two categories. What are the evidences for Christianity? What are the evidences for Jesus and his resurrection? And if God is good, why suffering? If God is good, why hell? Like there are those kind of questions, and I think being able to categorize them broadly in our minds do help give us ways and means that are quite natural to be able to have a deeper conversation. And I also really like your point to say that questions don't ask questions, questioners ask questions. So trying to understand the person who's asking the question, where is it coming from? What is their heart? What is their motivation? What is their intention in that space? And connecting with people is so beautiful. And I do think you're pointing to Jesus, who is far more interested in people than the questions. I think is really valuable. That there is this. We've got to remember that humans are made in the image of God, and as we engage with them in questions, no matter which way it is, they're coming from this place. They're coming from the place of humanity, and they need to be loved and cared and valued in that same way.
Not treating people like they're evangelistic projects and I need to get them into heaven. Just be real and be normal.
Yep.
Like,
so
goodness
good.
me. You look at the apologetics of Jesus, the bait he didn't take, the bait he did take. You look at Peter and Paul in Acts, and just the wisdom with how they navigated those situations. And I think in our cultural moment, it's not about, I said before, in my little rant about politics and stuff, the answer here isn't just because we're citizens of God's kingdom. I'm not saying we don't show up. I'm saying how we show up matters. Yep. And I think in our current cultural moment, we need to lead with presence. Like, these are just some thoughts. Like leading with presence. We're still firefighting, of course, but our strategy isn't backburning, fighting fire with fire. Maybe I'm taking the metaphor too far. I don't know. But it's more dousing with the springs of living water or something like that. My point is, so often truth is rarely heard until grace is first experienced. And I think right now, if the church can become the kind of people whose very presence feels like living water in a thirsty world, it's going to be effective. We need to refuse the outrage economy and be a non-anxious presence. Living lives that are disarmingly sane and are humble and are peaceful, the very kind that Peter talks about in his letter. If Christians are hurried, if we're outraged, if we're brittle, if we're tribal, then no matter how brilliant, we will sound just like some other cultural alternative in the marketplace of ideas. And I can already hear my Christian friends who will be complaining about what I'm saying. It's like, no, we need to stand up. And, you're being the winsome crowd, David. You're just being meek and mild. And I think Tim Keller was right. I'm sorry, I know there's politics about this. I think he was really onto something. And I think Christopher Watkin, his brilliant book, Biblical Critical Theory, he's a British guy, but he's down there at Monash in Melbourne. I commend that to serious thinkers within the church as a way to be involved in the culture. And I just think this us and them mentality is the weapons of the world, and I don't think it helps because it shouts over the top of other people. How we show up really does matter. Our culture will then see the kind of patient, joyful, stable posture that we're called to have. And I think that's going to be what's going to invite the questions. But with that kind of presence, I think we also need to be genuinely curious. And so, again, when somebody comes at you, even if it's aggressive and maybe their amygdala or whatever's going off, and this has happened, just remaining calm and disarming them by being curious, like, oh, maybe this person has something that I don't know. Like, don't assume that you know where they're coming from. Today, there's a degree of like mistrust in intellectualism and all of that and all of the rest. But if we just ask questions, if we just listen, if we learn people's stories, if we take time to connect with them and trace the contour of their longings, then it'll actually give a space for us to be able to speak meaningfully with what we know, because we've actually given that relational right to kind of step in. But all of that to say, it's not just passive. It's not just taking the hits, asking questions like Jesus, because Jesus didn't just stop there either. He then stepped forward. And this is the backward-forward dynamic of apologetics, commending, defending. We need to always make sure that we share the better story. I once heard Sam Aubrey, who was one of our teachers in the UK too, he came across and I love it. It was so infectious, his love for scripture. And by the way, John Lennox, if we've got time, it'd be fun to talk about him too. But Sam Aubrey, he said, I just love the challenge of trying to, and this isn't a quote, it's roughly what he said. I love the challenge of trying to figure out how the gospel uniquely speaks into the ebbs and flows of every cultural moment. And it has a lot to say in the rubble of a culture where the dominant stories of identity and freedom and autonomy are now falling apart. Like how does the good news of Jesus speak to identity received and longing fulfilled and guilt forgiven and justice and all of the rest? It has a lot to say. And narrating the world as Jesus narrated it, from creation to cross to resurrection to new creation, helping people to see themselves inside this better story. So that when we speak, it's not like a triumphalist, but it's with this tender confidence of redemption. And the Christian story in that way, it will stop sounding like a demand and start sounding like the home that people's hearts have been aching for all along. And, you ask the question, well, how do we equip? How do we help people? You know what? 80% of the apologetics task comes from knowing the Bible and knowing your place in it. It's just knowing the storyline of Scripture, so that when somebody asks, why is this world screwed up? You go, we were created for good, but then Genesis 3 were damaged by evil. But then God puts into action and he chooses a nation. And then he comes in the cross, and then he sends a church to heal. And then one day everything will be set right. Now you've got the basic narrative arc of Scripture that can orient how you now navigate all of those questions that come to you. And so this is a challenge for both Christians and teachers and leaders at church, is to really help people understand that basic narrative arc of Scripture to orient them as they navigate the wild world of all the sorts of questions that get thrown at us.
And I think Christopher Watkin actually does that so well in his writing. I mean, he takes the Augustine sort of city of God picture and he draws that arc and he goes, hey, look at the narrative. And he tries to implement that into cultural sort of societal norms and go, hey, this is not necessarily something that needs to be polarizing as the world is portraying it to be, but there is a journey that's across this. I think it was like, so I second your recommendation in that space and go, like if you're serious about trying to discern God's great picture on the overall, his biblical critical theory is really, really good reading.
And likewise, like if there are people who are really keen for, is Christianity true? John Lennox, I mean, what a legend in that regard. He's phenomenal, right? You want to hit out some of that John Lennox stuff? Why don't you tell us a story about him?
This is something that I so appreciated about Lennox was, again, his love of Scripture. I mean, the man, if anyone doesn't know, well, let me be a little bit sober to begin with. I think I'm on the Gospel Coalition in writing, reflecting on Ravi Zacharias' ministry and how we need to be so careful not to celebritize and put people up on high pedestals. And I don't want to do that with Lennox. But what I just appreciate about this man, he's an academic don, triple doctorate, 4 masters, speaks 5 languages, and he's just a grandpa. He's warm, he's kind. And he comes into the classroom, right? We sat there. He's a brilliant teacher too, in that sense. But he comes into this classroom of ours a number of times, and he just sits in that armchair up the front, no notes, just sits there, pulls out his Bible, puts it in his lap. And he does what Jesus does in terms of asking questions and connecting with us. And he says, all right, today we're going to talk about creation in the book of Genesis. And then he went around the room and he got us all to share our biggest questions that we have about Genesis. And we all said the predictable things like the age of the earth and evolution and the meaning of day and so on and so forth. And then he opened up the Bible and said, all right, well, let's walk through this together. And 2.5 hours later, after wandering through the text together and asking and answering back and forth, he closed his Bible and he said, now, did you notice that none or almost none of those questions that you raised at the beginning even came up? And I thought, wow, he's right. So much of what Genesis is trying to communicate gets missed because we come with modern questions that ancient authors weren't even trying to answer. Yep. And when we slow down and just read the scripture on its own terms, we begin to see what the text is actually trying to say. And so coming out of that class, what I realized is a couple of things. Not only the content of the lesson, what he actually shared, but the moral of the lesson. And that is not that our questions were wrong, but that they just weren't really the issue that Genesis was trying to address. But the reason why that's etched in my brain now, and I think I'll take it to the grave, is because just like Jesus asking good questions, asking questions to somebody else in that connection space, it allows them to do the heavy lifting for themselves so that they have to come to the answer through your facilitation, not you just downloading on them. Because just like when you go to the gym and you lift a heavy weight, the stretch and the burn, that's what produces the growth. And if Jesus asked 307 questions and directly answered less than 10, I think maybe that tells us something about the power of helping people discover the truth of the gospel for themselves rather than just downloading it all on them at once and expecting them to be born again in 10 minutes. So, yeah, I think that was such a really cool thing to see in his ability to be a Socratic teacher in the truest sense of the term of eliciting awareness and information and transformation in my head and heart just from sitting there asking questions and helping me to realize what the text was saying all along.
Yeah, it's cracking, Dave. Mate, we really appreciate you joining us. What a great conversation. Really appreciated your time this morning. Mate, we want to come again one time? Would love to have you.
Yeah, mate, it'd be good. I'd be keen to talk about whatever is on next.
Yeah, and we would love to have you up here, actually. It would be a lot of fun just to have you up here and to hang out. We'll shout you a glass of wine, a good glass of wine from Orange, and some good food as well, mate. We'll take care of you in this, upper echelon of country, apparently, according to you. But, mate, thank you so much for joining us. Have a fantastic Christmas. All the best, mate. Look forward to catching up with you again.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah. Thanks so much, Joe.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
That was a great conversation.
Yeah, it was good, hey?
I enjoyed that. Immensely. What a seriously gifted dude.
Yeah.
I love his story. So interesting. Just this boldness that God gave him after this kind of one moment. Like he knew the Lord, loved the Lord, but this boldness that came and then to go and stand up and go and give that speech is pretty bold.
I think I wish my parents gave me the advice of just go do life a little bit. Ministry's hard.
Ministry is hard, but I think there's some benefit there. But then like his own courage to go and study overseas a couple of different times. He wanted to dive in. He wanted to know, and he didn't even know where it was taking him. He just wanted to know.
Yeah.
He wanted to know the Lord more. He wanted to engage in God's word more, and then as opportunities presented themselves, he kind of took it and found himself in a space, which I think is it's actually really beautiful.
I was worried for a moment there that he was sort of going to go like a street epistemology, kind of like ask questions until you find the flaw in their thinking, expose them. But he didn't, and I think the method and the idea of going, hey, when you're confronted, the easiest way to diffuse that is to just go, oh, why are you saying that?
But I'm not even sure it's even just as like I get it as a methodology of diffusing, but what I loved about that is it's an invitation to engage in humanity. So you're not actually trying to do it in such a manner as to avoid the question or to give yourself even a breath, but actually to recognise that the person that is asking that question is a person, but it's coming from somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? The question's coming from a deeper place, right? Particularly, I think, when we're asking questions around is God good type questions. I think that is a really emotionally difficult place because people are talking out of their own hurt.
But again, I don't because you're right, but I don't want people to feel bad if they're going, I need to ask this question
No, sure.
or to catch my breath, because the reality is it can sometimes come out of nowhere. It can sometimes catch you.
As in the question someone asks, yeah, sure.
Catches you off guard. You're just like, whoa, I wasn't prepared for this space. Diffusing that easy way to just give yourself an opportunity to reflect on their humanities, just to go, well, that came out of left field.
Okay.
Why do you think?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It helps. It's just a helpful mechanism that he offered, going, seek connection first.
Yeah.
Do that through questions.
Yeah, and I think that is what's gold. And I think that's a fundamental that we as the church and as individuals need to take hold of, I think, in our current world. I think that was one of the many pieces of gold that Dave kind of gave us in that space.
There's two others that I want to just touch on. One, I think he defined Australian culture and the apathy within Australia, she'll be all right kind of mentality really well. I thought that was good. I haven't necessarily caught that. John Owen spoke through suspiciousness and stuff like that. But I thought that was really good in terms of how Australians relate to God. And just then saying, hey, because of that, play the long game.
Yeah.
They're not projects. You're not there to go, I need to get them to Jesus. Like, become people that they can depend on.
Yeah.
They can see Jesus in, and they will end up asking questions when the time arises.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? So, like, we often talk about, we didn't get a chance to explore evangelism, the difference between evangelism and apologetics, and I do think that there is much overlap in lots of ways. Because evangelism is proclaiming it, the euangelion, like it's proclaiming the good news, right? So it is a speech act. But I like the way, I think apologetics as the way Dave was putting it then, is marrying this idea of living out and proclaiming the gospel in a beautiful way, that you can't actually separate the two, that there is this deep synergy within them and of both speaking and acting in such a way that I think is super helpful. And I think the other thing too is recognizing that we're going to get it wrong. We're going to get it wrong. We're going to get it wrong in the way we evangelize. We're going to get it wrong in the way that we live at times. We're going to get it wrong in the way that we give in a defense of the gospel and the likes. And God's grace is immense in that space, and God's far more powerful. And that person's salvation is not dependent upon my ability to communicate. And I think that's what Dave was hitting out of, where I think a foundation where we can give it a defense comes out of who Jesus is, and not just about who he is in terms of the evidences for Jesus, but actually who he is for our own self to digest, that he is a God of grace, he is a God of mercy. The Spirit does dwell in us and enable us to be able to speak. He's not going to condemn us if we get it wrong. So I think it's both and in that space. Yeah. And I think it's once we know the character of God and we know the character of God here and we know the character of God here, I do think it minimizes the risk of defensiveness when the questions come. Because my years of ministry, Nick, in all honesty, I do think defensiveness comes when we are not connected to the Lord and we don't understand that the kingdom in which we are part of is not a human kingdom. It is a spiritual kingdom. We're not trying to build a human kingdom of God here on earth, but rather God is ushering in his kingdom as he works through his people. I think it's so important because some of the risks are, I think, for us as Christians, is that we work out of a mindset of defensiveness for ourselves and of the gospel because we're fighting for something that is counter the King of Kings and Lord of Lords and his kingdom.
I think in all of it, whether we get exposed, whether we're underqualified, whether we make mistakes, you quoted Hebrews 4, and that's the truth of it. It's that we receive grace and mercy from the throne room of grace. And you can present yourself with confidence.
Yep.
Going, here I am, Lord, use me. And so I think it's good, Nath. I think before we implement these 3 steps, what you're saying is, well, we first got to connect with God. Be connected to God. And that will open ways in which we connect to people better.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And I think it's so important for us. Man, what a way to finish the year of podcast. So 11. So to my mum and the 6 other people who listen to us, thank you for joining us this year.
Hey, mum listens.
Your mum does listen, and your dad. I get messages. I love your mum and dad. I'm actually missing them. They were here last Christmas, and I was actually thinking about them last night, and I wish they were here with us at Christmas again. But to all of our faithful followers and listeners, thank you so much for joining us on the Balancing Act in 2025. As we do that, big shout out to our producer, Andrew McDonald, who's just done a stellar job, really. Absolute stellar job. And making
us look good.
Well, not physically, but I think he tries his best to make it sound good and be presentable because he's not working with much. So he's doing a banger job, to be fair. But he's so influential in helping us get so many of our guests and other bits and pieces. So Andrew, thank you so much, mate. We really appreciate you. Have a Merry Christmas, everyone. Please be safe. And we look forward to many more Balancing Act podcasts in 2026.
Bless you guys, man.
See ya.